He said friendship doesn't need paperwork. My coffee went cold before my hope did. That's the day I started filing for my own peace. My name's Helen. I'm 47 years old, and this is the story of how my best friend stole my brand name and how I trademarked my story instead. You ever love somebody so much you forget to protect yourself? That was me and Sharon. 22 years of friendship, from church choir to business brunches. We built everything together. Late nights, prayer circles, broken nails from packing candles in her garage. The dream was supposed to be ours. The brand was called Soul Flame, a little candle line that smelled like hope. Every scent had a story. Sunday grace, kitchen prayers, after the storm. We said it was light for the brokenhearted. She handled the social media and I handled the making. It was faith, fire, and friendship. Until it wasn't. "Girl, we're finally going to be in Target," she said one morning, sliding her iPad across the counter. My heart jumped. "You serious?" She nodded, grinning like she'd just touched heaven. "They emailed me last night, said they love our brand. They want to talk exclusivity." I blinked. "Emailed you?" She shrugged. "You know how I handle the marketing side. Don't worry, I got us." But something in her tone didn't sit right. Maybe it was the me in her sentence. Maybe it was the way she avoided my eyes. That week, I checked our business email. Password changed. Instagram, locked. TikTok, new name, website, gone. When I called her, she answered like nothing happened. "Hey, bestie, you okay?" "Sharon, why can't I log into our accounts?" She paused. I heard the click of her tongue. "Oh, that. Yeah, I had to switch things around for the new investors. Simpler structure." "Investors?" I said slowly. "Since when do we have investors?" Her voice turned sharp. "Helen, you always get emotional when it comes to business. Let me handle it, all right? You focus on production." I hung up. For the first time in 22 years, the silence between us felt like a wall. That night, I went on Instagram from my niece's phone, searched Soul Flame. There it was, my candles, my kitchen, my handwriting on every label, but the bio said, "Founded by Sharon Wallace, where faith meets fragrance." I stared at that line until my vision blurred. The comments were all, "Congratulations, Sharon. So proud of you, boss lady." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry either. I just sat there, replaying every moment she'd told me, "We're in this together." Next morning, I drove to her house. She opened the door in silk pajamas, sipping a smoothie. "Hey, girl," she said, smiling like my world wasn't burning. "You stole my company," I said quietly. Her smile faltered for a second, then came back stronger. "Don't be dramatic. You still get your cut." "My cut?" "Of course, you're the creative one. I'm the business mind. I did the paperwork, filed the LLC, registered the site, set up the brand deals. It's my name on the documents, Helen, legally." I felt something break inside me. Not rage, not even sadness, just disbelief. "You mean to tell me," I said slowly, "that you took everything we built and made it yours on paper?" She sighed like I was the problem. "It's not personal. It's business. I'm just better at this part than you." I looked at her marble countertops, her new gold bracelets, all paid for by the candles we poured in my old kitchen while my son was still in high school. "You forgot something," I said finally. She raised a brow. "What's that?" "The soul part." Then I walked out. Weeks went by. I could have sued her, could have screamed on Facebook, could have begged her to make it right, but I didn't. I stayed quiet, went back to my church job, worked double shifts at the bookstore. Folks asked what happened, and I just said, "God's still working." But silence don't mean surrender. Late one night, I found myself scrolling through old notes, the original sketches, recipes, slogans, all dated, all mine. And something inside whispered, "Start over. But this time, protect yourself." So I did. I saved up 3 paychecks and filed for a trademark, not for the name Soul Flame, but for something deeper. I called it the Helen Harper story. I trademarked my own pain, my journey, my testimony. If she wanted my candles, fine. But she couldn't have my story. I started a YouTube channel sharing the real story behind every scent. How after the storm came from the night I survived my divorce. How kitchen prayers came from feeding my son on faith. Each video ended with one line: they can steal your name, but not your narrative. 3 months later, one of those videos went viral. 1 million views, then 2, then 5. Comments flooded in. This woman's voice healed me. I don't even buy candles, but I needed this. Trademark your story, queen. And I did. Again and again. Every quote, every tagline, every moment of truth. My lawyer laughed when he saw the folder. You trademarked yourself, Miss Harper. Yes, I said, because that's the only thing nobody else can copy. By summer, my story had more reach than her brand. She had target. I had testimony. She had followers. I had faith. One day, she texted me out of nowhere. Hey girl, we should collab again. The fans love your voice. I typed for a long time before I answered. I don't collab, I consult. Then I sent her my new rate sheet. Silence. A week later, her assistant emailed me, asking to license my name for her next collection. I read it twice before replying. You can't afford me anymore. It wasn't revenge. It was revelation. I realized God let her take the brand so I'd protect the woman. And when people ask, now what happened to Soul Flame? I smile and say, it burned bright, but I learned to build fireproof. Because some lessons don't come with comfort. They come with copyright. When I say the internet can build you or break you, I mean it'll test your heart first. After that viral video, my inbox turned into a war zone. Half the people cheering me on, half asking, you sure you want to air all that? But I wasn't airing drama. I was testifying. Because see, when you survive betrayal, your story becomes medicine. And I was just learning how to prescribe it right. The first time I went live, my hands were shaking. Camera propped on a stack of cookbooks, one candle burning behind me. I said, hey y'all, it's Helen. Some of you know me as the voice behind the story that's been going around. About my best friend who took my brand. I'm not here to drag her. I'm here to teach you something my mama taught me. Protect your name before you protect your dream. The comments started flying in. Say that again, sis. Protect your name before your dream. Whew. This woman preaching tonight. I didn't even realize tears were falling until somebody typed, you okay, Miss Helen? I wiped my face and smiled. I'm better than okay. I'm trademarked. That line hit like lightning. People started clipping it, remixing it, putting it on shirts before I even made any. A week later, a young woman from Atlanta DM'd me. Miss Helen, I'm in beauty school. My cousin stole my logo. I was ready to quit till I saw your video. You gave me strength. I wrote her back. Baby, don't fight for what's stolen. Build something new that can't be taken. That became my motto, my second trademark. Build something new that can't be taken. That fall, I started speaking at local business events, small ones at first, church halls, women's luncheons, the kind with cold chicken salad and too much perfume in the air. I'd step up to the podium, palms sweating, and say, before you get the LLC, get the LOVE for yourself right. They'd laugh, clap, cry, sometimes all three in the same minute. I'd tell them about Sharon, about the day I watched her sign those papers, about the silence that came after. I didn't use her name, didn't have to. Everyone in that room had their own Sharon. Someone who smiled while taking your spot. Someone who called you sister right before closing the door in your face. After one of those events, a woman in a red blazer came up to me. Miss Harper, she said, you got a gift. Have you ever thought about writing a book? I laughed. Ain't nobody trying to read my mess, baby. She smiled back. You'd be surprised who needs your mess to make sense of theirs. Her name was Danielle Grant, senior editor at a small publishing house in Chicago. She handed me her card. Call me, she said. Your story deserves pages. I did call. 2 weeks later, I was on Zoom with her team. Me sitting at my kitchen table, candle burning, same cup of coffee I'd reheated 3 times. Danielle leaned forward. "Helen, I don't want a business book. I want your book. The woman, the betrayal, the rebirth." I took a deep breath. "You sure folks want to hear all that?" Her eyes softened. "People don't just want to buy candles anymore, Helen. They want to buy peace. And your story is peace with paperwork." That's how Trademarked by Grace was born. Now, while all this was happening, Sharon wasn't quiet either. She started posting on social media, long captions about haters who can't move on and fake friends who play victim. Folks tagged me under every post. I never replied, because silence hits louder when your success starts echoing. One evening, my cousin Tasha came over with a bucket of fried chicken and her phone buzzing nonstop. "Girl, have you seen this?" she asked, shoving the screen in my face. It was Sharon, live on Instagram crying fake tears. "I built Soulflame from nothing," she said, voice trembling, "and now this woman's out here claiming my ideas. I just want peace." Thousands of comments, most of them not even knowing the truth. Tasha's hand tightened around her phone. "You want me to go off? I'll go off right now." I smiled. "No need. Let her light her own fire. I've already moved on." But inside, I felt that old ache, that sting you get when someone rewrites your history in front of strangers. That night, I sat alone by the window. The city outside buzzed, headlights like tiny prayers moving down the street. I whispered, "Lord, don't let me get bitter. Just make me better." And the next morning he did. I got a call from a TV producer, said they wanted to feature me on a segment called Women Who Rebuilt. When the cameras came, I told the story straight. Not perfect, not polished, just truth. "Sometimes," I said, "God will let someone steal your brand so he can teach you how to brand yourself." The clip went viral again, 4 million views this time. My inbox exploded with invitations, podcasts, speaking tours. Even Oprah's book club inquiry team sent a message that started with, "Hello, Miss Harper, we've heard about your story." Meanwhile, Sharon's company started slipping, orders delayed, customers complaining, her investors pulling out quietly. Turns out running a brand built on betrayal don't last long, because lies got a shelf life shorter than any candle wick. One day, she showed up at my new storefront. Yes, I had a storefront now. Small space on Jefferson Street, right across from the church where I used to volunteer. She stood outside in her designer coat, eyes darting between the gold letters above the door, the Helen Harper story to me. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered. "Hey," she said, softly, "can we talk?" I nodded, motioning her inside. She glanced around at the shelves lined with books, candles, framed quotes, and photos of women I'd mentored. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." She swallowed hard. "I miss us, Helen." I met her eyes. "You miss control, not me." Her lip trembled. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I sighed. "I believe that, but meaning ain't the same as mending." She looked down. "You really trademarked your name?" I smiled gently. "My story, my scent, my slogan, all mine." She laughed weakly. "Guess you outgrew me." "No," I said. "I outgrew needing to be understood by people who never planned to stay." She left without another word. I stood at the window, watching her walk away, a chapter closing itself. I didn't feel angry, just light. That evening, I hosted my first workshop. Title on the board, Protecting Purpose, Paperwork for the Passionate. Room full of women, single moms, nurses, artists, dreamers, all scribbling notes while I spoke. "Ladies," I said, pacing the front of the room, "your paperwork is your prayer in ink. Don't just dream it, document it." They clapped, shouted, "Amen," snapped fingers. I smiled. "And if anybody ever steals your idea, remember, you can always trademark your comeback." Afterward, one girl about 20 came up to me. She looked nervous, biting her lip. "Miss Helen," she said softly, "what if the person who hurt you was your mom?" The room quieted. I took her hand. "Then, baby," I said, "you forgive her, but you still file the paperwork." We both laughed through our tears. By the time I got home that night, my phone was buzzing again. This time it was Danielle, my editor. "Girl, we hit the list," she said. "What list?" "The Times. You're a bestseller." I froze, candle flickering beside me. "Me?" I whispered. She laughed. "Yes, you, Miss Trademarked by Grace herself." I hung up and sat there, staring at that little flame dancing. I thought of Sharon, thought of the nights we dreamed under that same glow, and I realized something. Maybe I lost a friend to find myself, and maybe that's the best trade I ever made. Fame don't feel like what people think. It's not lights and flowers. It's emails at 3 a.m., interviews you didn't ask for, and strangers calling you inspiring while you're still learning how to breathe again. After the book dropped, my world changed faster than I could fold laundry. One day I was pouring candles in my kitchen. Next day I was sitting on a stage under hot lights while a talk show host said, "So Miss Harper, when your best friend stole your brand, did you ever imagine you'd end up here?" I smiled for the cameras. "No, ma'am, I just imagined surviving." The crowd clapped like I'd said something profound, but the truth was simple. I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. I was chasing redemption. What they don't tell you about healing is it gets quiet. When the noise fades, the applause, the validation, the "you go, girl," you're left with the question, now what? That's where I was, sitting in my new office, looking at my reflection in the glass wall, trying to figure out if I still recognized the woman in the mirror. I had everything I prayed for: peace, purpose, paychecks, but some nights I missed having somebody to call at 2 a.m. just to say, "Girl, look what God did." I used to think healing meant getting back what I lost. Now I knew it meant becoming someone I'd never been. Then one Sunday, after service, Pastor Lee stopped me at the door. "Miss Helen," he said, "you ever thought about mentoring?" I laughed. "I barely mentor myself some days." He smiled. "That's exactly why you should. The women listen to you." That's how I ended up in the basement of the church, leading a group of 12 women with notebooks and broken hearts. We called it the Rebuild Circle. Every week we met, no makeup, no filters, just truth. We talked about starting over, about forgiveness, about how to stop apologizing for shining. I told them, you can't light your own candle if you keep using your flame to keep someone else warm. They wrote that one down. One night after class, a young woman named Layla stayed behind. Pretty girl, tired eyes. You could tell she'd been surviving more than living. She said, "Miss Helen, can I ask you something real?" "Always." "What if the person who betrayed you never apologizes?" I smiled softly. "Then you learn how to heal without their permission." She nodded, tears rolling down. "That's hard." "Baby," I said, "so is staying broken." Around that time, offers started rolling in. Brand deals, podcasts, even a film studio asking about rights to my book. They wanted to dramatize my story. I told them, long as the actress drinks her coffee black and her silence loud, I'm fine with it. But what really made me stop was an email from a name I hadn't seen in 2 years. Sharon Wallace. Subject line, "Let's talk, please." I stared at it for a long time. My cursor hovered over delete, but something said, "Open it." "Helen, I don't know where to start. Everything fell apart after you left. The investors pulled out. My lawyer said I could lose everything. I'm sorry. Not just for the business, but for the way I treated you as a friend. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need to say it. Sharon." I closed the laptop, sat there in silence. Not angry, not relieved, just still. Forgiveness had been a theory before, something I preached at workshops, but now it was standing at my digital doorstep asking to come inside. That night, I called my son, Marcus. "Baby," I said, "you remember Auntie Sharon?" He chuckled. "How could I?" "Forget? You used to make me drop off those candle boxes at her house every weekend." "Well?" "She wrote me." He went quiet. "You gonna write back?" "I don't know." He paused. "Ma, sometimes forgiving someone ain't about letting them back in. It's about letting yourself move on. That boy got his wisdom from somewhere. The next morning, I replied, Sharon, I believe you're sorry. I really do. I forgave you a long time ago. Not for you, but for me. I pray your new path brings you peace. Helen. I didn't hit send out of weakness. I hit it out of strength. Because when you stop carrying resentment, your hands are free to build again. A week later, I got another surprise. Danielle, my editor, called me again. You sitting down? She asked. Should I be? Lifetime wants your story. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my tea. You mean the channel with all the cheating husbands and the dramatic music? She laughed back. Exactly that one. But this time, the woman wins. When the movie crew came to town, it was surreal. They rented my old house, the same kitchen where Sharon and I used to pour wax. When I walked in, everything smelled like lemon polish and déjà vu. The actress playing me, a young woman named Nia, hugged me tight. Miss Helen, I hope I do you justice. You already did, baby, I said. You showed up. The first time I saw my story on screen, I cried. Not because of the betrayal scenes, but because of the quiet ones. The moments when Helen sat alone at her kitchen table, praying over a stack of trademark forms. That was the part nobody saw, the paperwork, the patience, the persistence. When the movie aired, when Trademarked by Grace started trending again. People all over the world posted their own stories. Bakers, stylists, coders, mothers, all saying, I trademarked my story too. It wasn't just a movie anymore. It was a movement. One night after the premiere, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered out of habit. Miss Harper? Yes, who's this? It's Sharon. I closed my eyes. You all right? Yeah, just watched the movie. Silence. You tell it well, she said finally. I told the truth, I replied. I know. Her voice cracked. And I'm glad you did. I could hear the tears she was trying to hide. Take care of yourself, Sharon, I said softly. We both survived. Let's make that mean something. Then I hung up. Gently, not angrily. And for the first time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a benediction. The next morning, my inbox was full again. But this time, something new. Messages from lawyers, nonprofits, women's groups wanting to collaborate on an initiative called Trademark Her, a fund to help women legally protect their businesses and stories. We launched it 6 months later. And guess who sent the first donation? Sharon Wallace. At the press conference, I mentioned her name on purpose. Today ain't about who hurt who, I said. It's about what we build after the breaking. The crowd stood up. Cameras flashed. And I realized something deep in my bones. Every betrayal carries a blueprint, if you're brave enough to look for it. That night, I went home, lit one candle, the very first scent I ever made. Sunday Grace. I watched the flame flicker, whispering to myself, she took the brand, God gave me the blueprint. And baby, that's the kind of trade no thief can ever win. Sometimes, success feels heavier than failure, because when you finally stand on your mountain, you realize how many storms you had to survive just to see the sunrise. After the Trademark Her Foundation took off, my days became a blur. Interviews, mentorship calls, keynote speeches. Folks were calling me Miss Helen, the brand whisperer. I laughed every time I heard that. I wasn't no whisperer. I was just a woman who'd been silenced long enough to learn how to speak with purpose. One afternoon, I was packing up from a workshop in Atlanta when a young man tapped me on the shoulder. Excuse me, Miss Harper. I'm from a podcast called Start Over Stories. Can I ask you something on record? I smiled. Depends on what it is. He hit record anyway. What's the hardest part of forgiving somebody who betrayed you? I paused, choosing my words like they weighed gold. The hardest part, I said, is realizing they probably sleep fine at night. And you gotta choose peace anyway. He blinked, quiet for a second. That's heavy. Peace usually is, I said, but it's worth every ounce. A week later, that clip went viral, again. Comments poured in, she preaching wisdom wrapped in honey. Miss Helen speaking straight from the soul. I needed this today. People started tagging me under their own videos, folks from all over the world using my lines as mantras. And while it was beautiful, it was also a lot. Everywhere I went, people saw Aunt Helen, the strong woman who trademarked her pain. But nobody saw Helen Harper, the woman who still missed Sunday dinners, who still prayed over her bills, who still sat on her porch at night, wondering if love was ever coming back around. Then one evening, God answered that question in the most unexpected way. I was in Dallas for a conference, staying at a hotel that smelled like new carpet and ambition. After my keynote, I went down to the lobby cafe for a cup of tea. That's when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Miss Helen Harper, in the flesh. I turned around, and there he was. David Brooks. We went to high school together. Same choir, same graduation class. He used to sit behind me and tap gospel beats on the back of my chair. I hadn't seen him in 25 years. David, I said, laughing. Boy, you got old. He grinned, showing the same dimples he used to hide behind bad jokes. You ain't changed a bit. Maybe glowed up some. We talked for hours about life, loss, kids, purpose. He was a widower now, raising his teenage daughter. Said he'd been following my story online, but didn't want to reach out till he saw me in person. I wanted to tell you something face to face, he said softly. What's that? I'm proud of you, Helen. Simple words, but they hit deep, deeper than applause ever could. We started talking more. FaceTimes, long texts, little check-ins that turned into inside jokes. He didn't treat me like a celebrity or a brand, just Helen. One night he said, "You always carrying everybody else's light. When's the last time somebody carried yours?" I smiled. Been a while. Well, he said, I got good shoulders. I laughed so hard I almost dropped my tea. But that night, when I went to bed, I thought, maybe God really does send restoration in human form. 3 months later, he flew out to Chicago for my birthday, brought me a gift, a single candle in a glass jar with no label. What's this? I asked. He grinned. You tell me. I opened the lid. It smelled like rain on pavement and new beginnings. I call it second chance, he said. Thought it fit you. I stared at him for a long moment, then whispered, You made this? He nodded. Watched your YouTube tutorials. Figured if I was going to impress the candle queen, I had to do my homework. I laughed through tears. You fool. He leaned closer. Maybe, but I'm your fool now if you'll have me. We didn't rush it, didn't post about it, didn't make it a headline. Some things deserve to stay sacred. But that relationship taught me something deeper than any book deal or viral quote ever could. Healing don't always mean isolation. Sometimes it's learning to be loved in your new language. One morning, a letter arrived at my office. No return address. Inside was a check for $50,000, made out to Trademark Her Foundation. Attached was a note, for the women who think they can't start over. S.W. I stared at those initials. Sharon Wallace. I sat there a long time, hand over my mouth. Then I whispered, God, you really don't miss a detail, do you? Months passed. The foundation grew. We hosted our first national conference, Herstory Live. Hundreds of women came from all over the country. Some carried tears, some carried trademarks, all carried testimony. I stood on that stage, lights bright, heart steady, looking out at a sea of faces. Ladies, I said, the world told us to shrink, but look at us now. We're expanding, legally, emotionally, spiritually. The crowd roared. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was performing. I felt like I was home. Later that night, backstage, I found David waiting with a small velvet box. Now don't start crying. Yet, he said, smiling. David. He knelt right there in front of the Trademark Her banner and said, Helen Harper, will you marry me and let me protect your name and your heart? I gasped, hands trembling. The crowd out front started chanting, "Say yes! Say yes!" Apparently someone had peeked in. I laughed, tears streaming. "You sure you ready for this brand, sir?" He grinned. "Already filed the paperwork." The room erupted, cameras flashed, and I whispered the only word that mattered, "Yes." That night, I posted one photo. No hashtags, no announcement. Just the candle he gave me 2 years before, flame glowing bright. Caption, "Some stories start with betrayal. Mine ended with peace." The night after I said yes, I didn't sleep a wink. Not because of nerves, because of gratitude. See, for years I thought peace was something you had to earn after pain. Now I know peace just shows up when you finally stop rehearsing your hurt. David and I got married in a small ceremony behind my store. Nothing fancy. White roses, gospel choir, my son walking me down the aisle while "Never Would Have Made It" played softly in the background. The sign over the arch read, "Trademarked by Grace." People cried before I even said, "I do." After the wedding, life slowed down in the sweetest way. Mornings smelled like cinnamon coffee and safety. Evenings were quiet. 2 mugs, 1 porch, and a man who never needed to compete with my spotlight. "You know," he said one night, "I read your first trademark filing last week." I laughed. "Boy, you reading my old paperwork for fun now?" He shrugged. "I wanted to understand what kind of woman trademarks her pain." "And?" He smiled. "Turns out the kind of woman I prayed for." But peace don't mean life stops testing you, because a few months later I got an email that took me right back to year 1 of this whole story. Subject, trademark dispute, soul flame. For a second, my heart dropped. The sender was a corporate law firm representing a new company that had filed their own version of soul flame in another state. Different owner, same name, same fonts, same scent collection names. They thought I wouldn't notice. I called my lawyer, Sam. He sighed. "Helen, they're trying to capitalize on the old fame. Happens all the time." "Well, they about to capitalize on a cease and desist," I said. But that night, lying in bed next to David, I couldn't stop thinking, what if this keeps happening? Every few years, someone's stealing, copying, trying to rewrite. David turned toward me. "You okay, baby?" "I'm just tired of fighting for things I already bled for." He brushed my hand. "Then don't fight for the brand anymore. Build the legacy." That line stuck with me. Next morning, I called Sam. "Forget Soul Flame," I said. "Let them have their wax and wicks. We're going digital." "Digital?" "Yeah, let's trademark something they can't box, bottle, or sell. A movement." That's how the story Is Mine TM was born, an online mentorship network where women could register their own journeys, not just businesses. Every user's story became protected IP, time-stamped and documented. We weren't just teaching trademarks anymore. We were building a legal archive of resilience. The first month, 500 women joined. By month 6, we had 10,000 across 4 countries. Stories came pouring in. I trademarked my recipe. I trademarked my poetry. I trademarked my recovery program after addiction. Each one a declaration. I exist. I own my narrative. And with every new story, I felt my old scars soften just a little bit more. One day, as I was reviewing submissions, I found a familiar name. Sharon Wallace. My breath caught. Her file description said, "Trademark request, Second Flame, a mentorship series for women rebuilding after mistakes." Attached was a note, inspired by the woman who taught me that stealing a brand can never steal grace. I sat back, tears pooling in the corner of my eyes. The world really does have a funny way of circling back. That evening, I called her. She picked up on the first ring. "Helen?" "Yeah, got your submission." She laughed nervously. "I wasn't sure you'd see it yourself." "I see everything that carries light," I said softly. Silence. Then she whispered, "Thank you for not destroying me when you could have." I smiled. I wasn't sent to destroy you, Sharon. I was sent to evolve. We met up a week later at a small cafe downtown. No cameras, no makeup, just two women with history heavy as heaven. She handed me a small box. Inside was a candle. The label said, "Forgiven Fire." She said, "It's the scent I made when I realized healing smells like humility." I chuckled. "You still got your poetic touch." "I learned from the best," she said quietly. We talked for hours about what went wrong, about who we became, and somewhere between the apologies and the laughter, I realized this was the real ending I'd been waiting for. Not the fame, not the book, not the brand, but this, sitting across from the person who once broke me and feeling absolutely nothing but peace. Months passed, and the Story Is Mine team took on a life of its own. We got government grants, corporate partnerships, even a Netflix documentary offer. But none of that mattered as much as the message that landed in my inbox one ordinary Thursday night. It was from a girl named Maya, 17 years old. "Miss Helen, I watched your story with my mama. She cried the whole time. I started my own candle business called Hope Wax. I filed for a trademark yesterday. You saved my dream before it could even get stolen." I stared at that message for a long time, hand over my heart. Then I whispered, "That's it. That's why it all happened." Because sometimes God lets you lose something just so you can teach others how to protect theirs. That weekend, I stood on the balcony of my home, city lights glowing like a choir below. David came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "What you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far I came," I said softly, "and how I almost gave up before the real miracle." He kissed my temple. "You're the most trademarked woman I know." I laughed. "And still can't patent patience." He smiled. "That's why we got forever, to practice it." And when I finally blew out my candle that night, I said a small prayer. Not for more success, but for continuation. Because this story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who ever whispered, "That's me," while wiping her tears at 2 a.m. Every woman who turned silence into signature. Every woman who decided to trademark her truth. Legacy don't start when you die. It starts the moment you stop hiding the lessons you lived through. By the time The Story Is Mine turned 2 years old, we had chapters in 5 countries, brand partnerships with universities, and women teaching other women how to protect their dreams like they protect their children. And that was the day I decided to step back. Not because I was tired, but because I was ready. I called my team into the main office. We met in the same room where it all began. White walls, long table, scent of vanilla candles floating through the air. "I've been praying," I said, "and God told me something clear. This next chapter ain't about building bigger. It's about building others." They looked at me wide-eyed. My assistant, Janelle, frowned. "Miss Helen, you mean you're leaving?" "Not leaving, baby, lifting." I smiled. "Y'all about to run this now. I've trained you well enough to outgrow me." The room fell silent, then erupted in tears and applause. It was the kind of moment you dream about, your purpose continuing without your push. That evening, I sat on my porch with David. Sunset bleeding orange into purple. Birds slow dancing on the power lines. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. I nodded. "I spent half my life proving I was enough. Now I just want to be." He smiled, squeezing my hand. "So what's next for Helen Harper?" I grinned. "Maybe something small, something quiet, something just for me." But the world wasn't done with me yet. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Thick envelope, fancy gold seal. U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. My heart skipped. Inside was a certificate. Official registration. The Story Is Mine TM Foundation and Curriculum. It was real. My movement, once born from betrayal, was now federally protected. I sat there holding it, tears falling onto the paper, because that was the moment I realized I didn't just trademark a brand, I'd Trademarked a legacy. News traveled fast. Soon schools started calling. High schools, colleges, community centers. They wanted the program taught in classrooms. I said yes, but on one condition. You can't just teach business, you gotta teach boundaries. Every student received a workbook titled, Protect What You Produce. The first page had my favorite line printed in bold, Your silence is sacred, but your signature is strategy. Meanwhile, Sharon's mentorship series, Second Flame, was thriving too. She'd reinvented herself completely, teaching accountability, self-repair, and spiritual entrepreneurship. One evening, she called me. "You'll never believe it," she said, voice trembling. "A woman I mentored just trademarked her own brand, and she said your video changed her life." I smiled. See, redemption got a ripple effect. We both laughed. Not awkwardly this time, but freely, like two women finally walking on level ground. Then one morning, I woke up to an email that felt like a full-circle miracle. Subject line, TED Conference. Invitation to speak. I stared at it, blinking twice to make sure it wasn't spam. "Miss Harper, we would be honored to have you as one of our keynote speakers at TED Women. Topic, the business of healing." I just sat there, clutching my chest. "Lord," I whispered, "you really got jokes." 3 months later, I stood backstage under the red TED sign, lights bright enough to melt mascara. The producer counted down from 5. When the cue light hit green, I walked out slow, heart steady, palms dry. The audience went silent. I started with the same 3 lines that changed my life. He said friendship doesn't need paperwork. My coffee went cold before my hope did. That's the day I started filing for my own peace. People leaned forward, hooked already. Then I told them everything. The candles, the betrayal, the silence, the comeback. I told them how I trademarked my story instead of my pain. And when I finished, I said, you can forgive without forgetting. You can rebuild without revenge. And you can trademark your trauma, not to own the hurt, but to honor the healing. The crowd stood up. Longest applause I ever heard. After the talk, a woman in her 70s came up to me, tears running down her cheeks. She said, "Baby, I'm old, but I'm about to trademark my name just so my grandkids know what I stood for." I hugged her tight. "Do it, because your story deserves witnesses." Back home, my life settled into something soft. Sundays were for church, Mondays for mentoring, Tuesdays for gardening. I had a routine now, peace in motion. But one morning, while watering my roses, I noticed something. The first candle I ever made, the one labeled Sunday Grace, had melted down to the last inch. I picked up the jar and smiled. Every flame has its purpose. Mine had burned long enough to light others. A few weeks later, I got another message from a journalist writing a feature called Women Who Rebuilt the American Dream. They wanted to name me Legacy Woman of the Year. I laughed when I read it. Lord, if they only knew how messy the journey was. David chuckled from the couch. Maybe that's exactly why you deserve it. The night of the ceremony, I wore gold, not for vanity, but for victory. When I walked across that stage to accept the award, I thought of every version of myself that almost quit. I thought of Sharon. I thought of that cold kitchen table. I thought of that line, "Friendship doesn't need paperwork." And I smiled, because I proved that sometimes it absolutely does. I ended my speech the same way I end every story. If somebody ever steals your name, trademark your testimony, because nobody can duplicate grace. The audience stood, clapping through tears, and for a moment I felt time pause. Every heartbreak rewound and redeemed. Later that night, as we drove home, David reached over and took my hand. "You did it," he said quietly. I smiled. "No, baby, we did." He nodded. "So what's next?" I looked out the window, city lights blurring into gold. "Whatever it is," I said. "I'm going to file the paperwork first." We both laughed till we cried. You ever wake up one morning and realize the dream you used to chase is now your address? That's what peace felt like to me. Not an event, but an everyday location. I'd built an empire without bitterness, and I finally learned the difference between having power and being at peace. Because see, power needs applause. Peace just needs purpose. A year after the Legacy Award, I started teaching part-time at Howard University, a course called Business of Belonging, Protecting What You Build. My students were brilliant. All drive, no breaks. One girl named Jayla reminded me of my younger self. She wore ambition like perfume. One day she raised her hand and said, "Miss Harper, how do you know when to stop forgiving and start protecting?" The whole class went quiet. I smiled. "Baby, you do both at the same time. Forgiveness frees your spirit. Protection guards your future." They scribbled it down like gospel. But after class, Jayla lingered. She said, "My cousin tried to steal my business name, said I was too young to own anything." I laughed softly. "Tell your cousin," I said, "youth ain't a liability, it's leverage. And make sure your paperwork louder than her mouth." That same semester, I got another call from the producers at Lifetime. "Miss Harper," they said, "we want a sequel, not about revenge this time, about legacy." I said, "Y'all want me to play myself?" They laughed. "Actually, yes." I nearly dropped the phone. "Excuse me?" they insisted. "People don't just want your story anymore. They want your presence. You're not a character. You're a symbol." I thought about it long and hard, finally told them, "All right, but if I'm doing this, it's got to be truth from start to finish. No fake tears, no overdone drama, just faith, paperwork, and peace." They agreed. Filming started that summer. We shot scenes in the real places, my old church, my first store, even Sharon's old garage. She visited the set one afternoon, and the crew whispered like they were seeing a ghost. She hugged me and said, "Who would have thought we'd end up here?" I smiled. God did. The film came out under the title, Trademarked, The Rest of Her Story. It broke records for viewership, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. Women all over the world started sharing their own trademark moments, videos of the day they took their power back. One clip that went viral showed a woman standing in front of her ex-husband's car dealership with a new banner. Under new ownership, hers. The caption said, "Thanks, Aunt Helen." I laughed so hard I almost spilled my tea. At home, David watched me from across the room, smiling. "You know what's wild?" he said. "You became everybody's Aunt Helen." I shook my head. "I ain't nobody's aunt. I'm just the echo of 1,000 women who finally got tired of being quiet." He chuckled. "Still sounds like Aunt Helen to me." Then came the email that almost broke me again, but this time in the best way. Subject, Smithsonian exhibit proposal. Women who wrote their names in ink. They wanted to feature my story, my candle molds, my first trademark certificate, even my handwritten notes from the kitchen days. I cried when I read it, because I remembered those nights I couldn't afford butter, but still lit candles to make the house smell like hope. And now those same candles were going behind glass, not as merchandise, but as memory. On opening day, I stood in that museum staring at my own handwriting framed on the wall. A little girl tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mama, that's the lady who said we can trademark our dreams." Her mama smiled. "That's her baby." The little girl turned to me and said, "Miss Helen, can I be like you when I grow up?" I knelt down, eye level, and said, "No, baby, be like you. Just make sure your name's on the paperwork." She giggled, nodded, and ran off. That's when I knew, legacy complete. But life, even in peace, keeps evolving. One evening, I was reading on the porch when my son Marcus called. "Ma," he said, "you busy?" "Never too busy for you, baby." He hesitated. I proposed." I gasped. "To Maya?" "Yeah," he laughed. "She said yes." Tears hit my smile before I could stop them. I whispered, "You trademarked your heart, huh?" He laughed. "Guess it runs in the family." The wedding was small. Garden ceremony, sun low and golden, gospel choir, humming softly. When Marcus said his vows, he looked at me for a second mid-sentence. Everything I know about love I learned from watching my mother rebuild hers. I cried right there. Didn't even pretend not to. And when he and Maya danced under the string lights, I felt something click inside me. A quiet knowing that all the paperwork, all the pain, all the prayers had led to this. Generational peace. After the reception, I sat alone for a while, still in my silver gown, shoes kicked off, candle flickering on the table beside me. Sharon came over holding a slice of cake. "You did good, Helen," she said softly. "You really did." I smiled. "So did you." She nodded. "Guess we both learned how to build without burning." "Or maybe," I said, "we just learned how to burn better." We laughed, clinking forks like champagne flutes. That night, David found me sitting on the porch again, same spot I always end up. He wrapped his arm around me. "Thinking." "Always," I said. "But this time, it's not about what I lost. It's about what I left behind." He smiled. "You left a lot." "Maybe," I said. "But the best thing I ever did was trademark my peace." There's a special kind of quiet that only comes when your storm finally runs out of thunder. That's the quiet I live in now. I still wake up before sunrise. Old habits die tender. I make my coffee, whisper a little prayer, and light one single candle. No label, no brand, just light. Because these days, I don't need to prove I can shine. I just need to remember who gave me the fire in the first place. The world still calls me Aunt Helen, and I don't mind, long as they know Aunt Helen wasn't born strong. She was forged in the silence of betrayal, forged in the heat of humiliation, forged in the paperwork of peace. Every few months I still speak at conferences, not to chase applause, but to refill faith. Women still line up afterward, some holding notebooks, some holding hands, all holding back tears. One girl, maybe 20, once whispered to me, "Miss Helen, I haven't even started yet, but I already feel stolen." I took her hand and said, "Then baby, that means it's time to create something nobody can take. Start from your truth, file it under your name, and don't you dare apologize for surviving." She cried into my shoulder, and I realized this was the full circle. The same comfort I once needed I had become. And as for Sharon, we still talk. We never became what we used to be, but we became what we were meant to be. Every Christmas she sends me one candle, no note, no name, just scent. Last year's smelled like peppermint and peace. This year's came early. The label read, "Redemption." I lit it right away. The flame burned steady. No smoke, no flicker, just quiet light. Sometimes I get letters from strangers who watched my story or read my book. One from a woman in Ghana said, "I started a sewing business after watching your film. I couldn't trademark my company name yet, but I trademarked my worth." Another from a woman in Detroit wrote, "You taught me that silence can be strategy, not surrender." And one from a little girl, written in pink crayon, I simply said, "Miss Helen, my mom says we trademarked our house because we not leaving no more." I pinned that one on my wall, because that's legacy. Not headlines, but handprints. A few months ago, I got invited back to the Smithsonian for an update on the exhibit. They'd added a new section called Stories Signed in Ink. It featured 3 walls filled with signatures from women all over the world, each one who'd filed her first business, book, or nonprofit after seeing my story. Underneath the signatures was a plaque that read, "Inspired by Helen Harper," who proved that grace is intellectual property too. I stood there speechless, tears running quiet and warm. David slipped his hand in mine and whispered, "You did that, baby." But I shook my head. We did that. Every woman who ever decided her name was enough. After the ceremony, we drove home slow. Top down, Gospel humming through the speakers, city glowing like 1,000 answered prayers. I rested my head on his shoulder. "Remember when I thought my story ended with betrayal?" He smiled. "Turns out, that was just the prologue." These days, I've started writing again. Not business books or speeches, just stories. Short ones. Quiet ones. For me. Because writing was my first trademark. The one no one could ever file away. Sometimes I sit at my kitchen table, notebook open, candle burning, and I talk out loud to the girl I used to be. "You did good, baby," I tell her. "You didn't quit when quitting made sense. You didn't fight when fighting would have felt good. You built peace when pain was cheaper. I'm proud of you." And maybe it sounds strange, but I swear I feel her smiling back. One evening, Marcus stopped by after work. He sat across from me, sipping tea. "Ma," he said, "they want to name the business school after you." I froze. "You lying?" He shook his head. "Howard University. The Helen Harper Center for Women in Business and Law. They said your curriculum changed how they teach ownership." I sat back, blinking slow. "From candles in a kitchen," I whispered, "to classrooms with my name on the door." He smiled. "You always said, 'Light travels.'" A few weeks later, I stood under that sign, gold letters shining above the glass doors. The Helen Harper Center for Women in Business and Law. I ran my fingers over my name, not vanity, just gratitude, because that's when it hit me. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was resurrection. At the opening ceremony, I gave one last talk. No microphone, no teleprompter, just me. I started all this because someone stole my name. But now, my name is everywhere. Not because I fought, but because I forgave. And I realized something. You can't trademark truth, but you can teach it. I looked out over the crowd. Students, mothers, friends, even Sharon in the back row, tears in her eyes. Then I said, if you were ever told you're too much, be too much, and then some. If they said you're too emotional, use those emotions to build an empire. And if they said you're not qualified, just remember, paper can't measure purpose. The room exploded in applause. Not noise, now agreement. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood alone in that quiet hallway, the echo of clapping still hanging in the air. I took one deep breath and whispered, "Lord, you finished the assignment." Now every morning feels like an encore I didn't expect. I still make candles sometimes. Small batches, simple jars. I label them after chapters of my life. Betrayal, blueprint, breakthrough, peace. But the one that sells out the fastest, the one I never thought would mean so much, qualified. Because when women light it, they're not just buying a candle. They're declaring war on every voice that ever said they weren't enough. So if you ever hear my story, and I hope you do, don't remember me for the brand I lost. Remember me for the woman I became. A woman who learned that grace has a patent, peace has a profit, and revenge can rest easy once purpose takes its place. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.